2 years ago, my parents begged me to marry a man who was already twice divorced, insisting his past was just a series of unfortunate misunderstandings. When I refused to sign my life away to a master manipulator, my family called me ungrateful and cut me off entirely. I rebuilt my life from scratch, piece by piece, believing I'd finally left the nightmare behind, until last night, when my phone rang at midnight. It was him. He wasn't calling to apologize, nor was he calling to win me back. He was calling because his secret third marriage had just collapsed, and he needed me to cover up the very truth my parents helped him hide. Stay with me until the end to discover how a single recorded phone call shattered his web of lies forever, and don't forget to comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Clara. At 29 years old, I thought I knew where my life was headed until my parents tried to hand it over to a total stranger. We were sitting in the dining room of our suburban home when my mother set down a photo of Julian, a 38-year-old local entrepreneur with slicked back hair and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "He's established, Clara," she said, her voice dripping with urgency. "He wants to settle down." What she conveniently left out, until my father blurted it out over dinner, was that Julian had already been married and divorced twice. When I raised my hands in disbelief, pointing out the glaring red flags, my father slammed his fork on the table. They dismissed his past as nothing more than a series of unfortunate misunderstandings, insisting that a man of his status was a prize I couldn't afford to pass up. Julian had won them over completely with expensive dinners and vague promises of financial security, but as I looked at his polished picture, a cold feeling settled in my gut. My parents weren't just arranging a marriage, they were engineering my surrender. I refused to let their polished narrative blind me, so I started digging into Julian's past myself. What I found sent a chill straight down my spine. Through a mutual acquaintance, I managed to connect with his second ex-wife, who painted a terrifying picture of a man who used charm as a weapon. Julian didn't just end marriages. He systematically isolated his partners, drained their independent bank accounts, and left them buried under mountain loads of hidden debt. Armed with printed financial records and court documents, I confronted my parents in the living room, convinced they would finally see the truth. Instead, my father barely glanced at the papers before tossing them into the fireplace. He accused me of being ungrateful, paranoid, and arrogant, declaring that a woman nearing 30 had no right to be so picky. When I stood my ground and flatly refused to meet Julian ever again, my mother's tearful pleading instantly turned to stone. My father looked me dead in the eye and delivered a ruthless ultimatum. I would accept Julian's proposal, or I would pack my bags and be cut off from the family forever. I didn't hesitate. That very night, I packed 2 suitcases with everything I could carry and walked out the front door without looking back. My father locked the deadbolt behind me, stripping away my access to the trust fund and canceling my credit cards before sunrise. The months that followed were a grueling test of survival. I traded our spacious family home for a cramped studio apartment on the noisy side of town, taking 2 grueling jobs just to cover rent and basic groceries. The silence from my family was deafening. No checking in, no apology, just complete exile for daring to choose my own independence. There were nights I sat on the floor eating instant noodles, crying from sheer physical exhaustion and the crushing weight of betrayal. Yet, despite the fear and uncertainty, every small victory belonged entirely to me. I built a modest savings account from scratch, secured a stable office job, and slowly stitched my dignity back together. I had given up luxury and familial comfort, but in exchange, I had bought my freedom, a price I was entirely willing to pay to keep my life my own. 2 years into my quiet, independent life, the fragile peace I'd built was shattered in an instant. It was a raining Tuesday night, just past midnight, when my phone buzzed on the nightstand with an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, then answered, only to hear a smooth, familiar voice that made my blood run cold. It was Julian. Without a single word of apology or preface, he spoke with the same infuriating arrogance my parents had fallen for years ago. But behind his suave demeanor, I caught a sharp, desperate edge. He revealed that his secret third marriage, A whirlwind union he'd rushed into shortly after I fled had just completely imploded. She had caught him red-handed and filed for divorce. Julian wasn't calling to reconcile or express regret for what happened with my family. He was calling because he was cornered. His ex-wife's aggressive lawyers were auditing his assets, and he desperately needed me to sign off on old financial paperwork, claiming I was still listed as his business associate. Instead of hanging up, I forced my voice to stay calm and asked him to explain the paperwork. That was when the full picture of my parents' betrayal finally came into focus. Julian casually admitted that 2 years ago, my father had secretly listed my name as a co-guarantor on several of Julian's high-risk business loans to prove our family's commitment to the arrangement. They had used my credit, my identity, and my future as collateral without my knowledge or consent, believing I would eventually yield and marry him anyway. Now, with his third ex-wife's legal team freezing his assets and digging into every ledger, those fraudulent documents were about to trigger a massive forensic audit. Julian needed me to sign retroactive affidavits claiming I had willingly authorized those accounts, effectively taking the fall for his tax evasion and my father's illegal signatures. As Julian spoke, laying out his desperate plan to save his own skin, I realized he had handed me the exact key I needed to dismantle his entire web of lies. I didn't panic. I took control. Keeping Julian on the phone, I quietly enabled my phone's voice recorder and let him talk, asking precise questions that led him to explicitly detail every fraudulent document, my father's forged signatures, and his current attempt to bribe me into silence. For 3 days, I played the cooperative accomplice, gathering an ironclad paper trail of recorded calls, text messages, and email drafts he sent over for my signature. Instead of signing a single page, I took the entire dossier straight to the high-powered legal team representing Julian's third ex-wife, along with a copy to the state prosecutor's office. When his ex-wife's lawyers realized what I had handed them, their eyes lit up with predatory triumph. Julian thought he was manipulating a defenseless woman into taking the fall for his crimes, completely blind to the fact that he had walked directly into a trap of his own making, handing me every piece of evidence necessary to destroy him. The fallout was swift and devastating. Armed with the recordings and documents I provided, the courts froze Julian's accounts completely, exposing years of tax fraud and hidden assets that landed him behind bars. My parents were forced to sell their home to pay off massive legal fees and restitution for their role in the forgery. They tried to reach out to me, weeping and begging for forgiveness, but I kept my door firmly closed. Today, I sit in my own home, thriving, peaceful, and completely free from their toxic orbit. I proved that walking away isn't weakness. It's taking back your life. If you were in my shoes, would you have answered that midnight call or left the past in the dark? Comment your city down below and let me know how far my story has reached. Thank you for watching.